All right. Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Hello. Welcome to Top Technology Tools to Streamline. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to Top Technology Tools to Streamline Your Law Practice. My name is Lauren Amanda. I am the National Sales Director here at Alt Legal. I know Bree just went over some of this, but some quick announcements before we get started. Code of conduct's in front of you. Generally, don't be a jerk. Let us know if someone is being a jerk. Use your common sense, etc. CLE requirements. If you are watching this session live, you may qualify for CLE credit. Keep in mind that we are required to keep detailed attendance records, and those will include both whether or not you are in the session and whether it is the active tab. We'll announce a code. Well, I'll announce a code at a random time during the session. Take note of the code to include on your survey. To qualify for CLE credit, you must be in the session the whole time and have the code. After the conference, we'll send out CLE information about sessions you attended. Note that our CLE provider is only offering credit for the live presentation. Recorded sessions do not qualify. As for chat and CLE, you are welcome to use the chat on this platform to talk with your fellow attendees. For questions and comments for the presenter, please use @presenter and we'll make sure that they see them. This session has been brought to you by our generous sponsor, Alta Claro. Thank you so much. And now I'm so happy to introduce our speaker, Niki Black. Niki is a Rochester, New York-based attorney, author, journalist, and the legal technology evangelist at MyCase legal practice management software. She's the nationally recognized author of Cloud Computing for Lawyers and the co-author of Social Media for Lawyers, The Next Frontier, both published by the American Bar Association. She also co-authored Criminal Law in New York, a Thomson Reuters treatise. She writes regular columns for Above the Law, ABA Journal, and the Daily Record, and has authored hundreds of articles for other publications, and regularly speaks at conferences, like this one, regarding the intersection of law and emerging technologies. She's an ABA legal rebel and is listed on the Fast Case 50, the ABA LTRC Women in Legal Tech. And with all of that being said, Niki, let me pass this over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Like she said, my name is Niki Black. I am the legal technology evangelist with MyCase. Just by way of background and to give you some context, I practiced law for over a decade. I started off in the public defender's office. Then I was with a litigation firm for another 4 or 5 years. I've also been of counsel to a DWI defense firm. And then in 2012, I started with MyCase as a legal technology evangelist. You might be wondering, what is a legal technology evangelist? It's a very Silicon Valley-esque title. Essentially what that means is that I serve as the bridge between lawyers and technology, both internally at MyCase and externally. So internally, I work a lot with the product and marketing teams and the company overall to provide legal industry insight onto how lawyers use different types of features, insight on the messaging that lawyers are going to respond to, and then externally, I educate lawyers about how to use technology through my articles and through speaking at conferences like this one. And it's really a function that's become all the more important with the onset of COVID and with everybody working remotely. So as I go through this presentation today, one of my focuses is going to be on how tools can help you work remotely in particular. With the onset of the pandemic, everyone moved remote. And then since then, we have, depending on the levels in any given area, lawyers continue to often work remote, sometimes part-time, sometimes full-time. And I think we're going to expect to see a similar pattern going into the winter, from the fall into the winter. So I'm definitely going to highlight a lot of remote use cases throughout this talk. And I'm going to try to keep in mind, when I speak to IP lawyers, you guys run the gamut in terms of firm size. So you can have small boutique shops that do IP law, and then lawyers that are in large firms. So depending on the type of firm that you're in, some of this information will be more useful than others. Oftentimes when you're in a large law firm, the IT department dictates the types of tools that you can use and the types of software that you're going to be working in. But in any event, I'm going to discuss this from the concept of building a firm from the bottom up. And some may not necessarily be as relevant if you have an IT team that already dictates what you have to use within your firm. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk to you today about top technology tools to streamline your law practice. And I'm going to start by providing a broad overview of what I'm going to be talking about and a broad overview of how we ended up here at this point in time in terms of technology usage. I'm also going to be discussing throughout this talk some ethical issues that you need to know about as they're relevant to the tools that I'm mentioning. And then I'm going to dive into a bunch of different types of tools from about 10 different categories that you can use that are going to range from apps in some cases, like mobile apps, to full-fledged either legal billing or law practice management systems. I'm going to talk about non-legal options, meaning consumer types of software that are just targeted towards consumers, like, for example, Dropbox. And then I'm going to talk about the options that are specific to lawyers, and free options, and then fee-based options. So I'm going to try to run the gamut and give you a lot of different options that should be relevant oftentimes, no matter what type of firm you're working with. The other thing I would note is when it comes to legal billing, I know that patent lawyers bill in different ways. Some bill hourly, others are flat fee based. So some of the legal billing technology is based on hourly billing. So it may not necessarily be relevant if you're flat fee based, although oftentimes lawyers will keep track of their hours nonetheless, even when they do flat fees, in order to help predict fees in the future. So with that being said, let's dive in and talk a little bit about remote working and cloud computing and how did we get here? So how is it that we're able to work remotely from our homes, as the case may be, throughout COVID and prior to COVID? Lawyers often worked remotely anyway. It's because of cloud computing and mobile technologies. And it's the reason that we're able to use these tools and work from anywhere is because of a confluence of events that resulted in these capabilities becoming available around the same time, specifically mobile and cloud computing. And the reason I talk about mobile and cloud computing together is because you really can't have one without the other. Your mobile phones would be useless without cloud computing for the most part. Most of the functions that you rely on your mobile phones, the tools and the software operates in the cloud. So, and the reason this is because your mobile phones are small. So the processing chips are small. The memory storage that's available on them is not particularly great. And so oftentimes the processing and the data storage has to occur off of your phones. Where does it occur? It occurs in the cloud. So that's why I talk about these two things together. And just as a baseline, I think at this point, most lawyers understand what cloud computing is, particularly IP lawyers, because you tend to be more tech savvy overall than most lawyers as a group. But just to establish this baseline, let's just talk about what cloud computing is. Cloud computing is when your data and the software that you're using is operating on servers owned by third parties that are located outside of your law firm. So instead of your word processing or email programs running off of the hard drive on your computer, or the server located in your firm's basement or closet or wherever your firm's servers are located, it all happens on servers that are located somewhere else that somebody else owns and maintains, and oftentimes using software located on those servers. And how do you access that information? Through the internet. So whenever you log on, in most cases, you're using cloud computing. And that's why your mobile apps would be useless without the cloud. You can't run most of them on your phones. So you log on and it goes across the internet through your data connection or Wi-Fi if you're connected to it, and lands on those servers and runs whatever program you're trying to use on those servers. Simply put, the reason that mobile and cloud are talked about together and why they go hand in hand is that mobile devices are constrained by their memory and processing power and their battery life. But combined with cloud, the data processing and storage can happen off of those devices. So that's why I just wanted to lay a baseline on what the cloud was, make sure that we were all on the same page. And then all of the tools I'm going to be talking about today are cloud-based. So I did want to lay that out up front. And then I want to talk a little bit about momentarily the ethics of using cloud computing, because that's an important thing to consider when you're using these tools. But first of all, in terms of lawyers and cloud computing, when I started to write about cloud computing for the Daily Record, which is a local Rochester legal newspaper that's syndicated across Gatehouse Media's newswires, and then published oftentimes, it's picked up by other outlets, including, for example, the North Carolina lawyer or the Minnesota lawyer, or Michigan lawyer, I think it is. But there's about 50 different outlets across the country that it's picked up on. But in any event, I started writing about cloud computing for the Daily Record probably in about 2007, 2008. And at that point in time, I was urging lawyers to understand what it was because they were already using it without realizing it. Whenever you email with a client who uses Gmail, you're sharing confidential client information in the cloud. And a lot of lawyers didn't realize that, even if they were not using Gmail. So when I used to talk about it, lawyers were unwilling to consider using the cloud, even if they actually were and didn't know it. They had a lot of security concerns. The companies that provided cloud computing were often brand new, having just most of them launched in 2008, give or take. So they were concerned about the stability of those companies. So when my book was published in 2012, there were not a lot of lawyers that were using cloud computing or were comfortable with cloud computing at that point. So I like to use this as a reference just to show you how the ABA does a survey every year, the ABA Legal Technology Survey, to show you the change in time according to that survey, as when it comes to lawyers using cloud computing. So in 2011, there were only 16% of lawyers who responded to the survey saying that they use cloud computing as part of their day-to-day work processes as a lawyer. And I would note an asterisk with all of these statistics. Understood that they were using is what should be said, because there were significantly more lawyers using the cloud at that point. But it was 16% in 2011. In 2012, it had moved up to 21%. And then in 2013, it was at 31%. And it stayed close to 31% for a number of years. And then in 2016, it started to change, but when it really went up was last year, when about 56% of lawyers shared that they were using cloud computing. So you had the majority, more than half of lawyers using the cloud and understanding that they were. And the 2020 survey that just came out from the ABA Legal Tech was based upon last year's data, which is incredibly outdated now that we're all in the middle of COVID. But that one has shown that the number went up by, or the percentage went up by maybe 2%. I think it was 58%. But I would suggest they understood that they were using the cloud. I guarantee you the number is significantly higher that actually use cloud as part of their practice. But now the numbers are significantly higher because most lawyers are using cloud computing in order to work remotely. Sometimes their IT departments are able to provide them with remote access tools that allow them to remote access into their servers located at their firms. But oftentimes, in order to allow them to provide legal services from wherever they happen to be, the cloud is utilized in one way or another, even if most tools are used through remote access. So it'll be super interesting to see what the ABA survey says when it comes out next year based upon COVID, because COVID has essentially, everyone in the legal tech space agrees with this, accelerated lawyer technology use by approximately a decade. Incredibly quickly, more than any of us ever could have wished or hoped for. They are trying to promote tech with lawyers. So much so that, in fact, I have chaired the technology committee for my local bar association for the last 3 years. And one of the attorneys on that committee accused me of single-handedly launching, releasing COVID into the wild with the sole purpose of getting lawyers to use technology. I certainly didn't do that. I don't have the biomedical engineering background by any means, but it has had that effect. And so I think that one positive outcome of COVID or one change that we're going to see is that lawyers are going to be using technology at rates never before seen or even predicted prior to COVID. With that being said, mobile computing has been a much easier transition for lawyers. Lots of lawyers had Blackberries when the iPhone launched in 2007, and from there it just became it's much easier for lawyers to transition to mobile and then use apps in the cloud, even if they don't realize that they're doing that. So with different mobile tools, according to the 2016 survey, and it hasn't changed that much since then, 84% use their laptops, although I would suggest that the laptop usage has almost certainly gone up during COVID. 93% use their mobile phones for work-related tasks, and 51% use their tablets. Tablets probably also went up as a result of COVID, but we won't know until the studies conducted at the tail end of this year to find out how lawyers' tech use has changed. I want to cover the ethics of cloud computing quickly because it's important to understand your ethical obligations when you are using cloud computing technology in your practices. This is, the source here is outdated. The ABA has since taken down this website. They had a chart that listed the different states that have addressed cloud computing in ethics opinions, and then provided summaries of some of those opinions. At this point, more than, I think it's close to 30 states, possibly 32, have issued opinions on cloud computing and said that it's ethical for lawyers to use the cloud. And the ABA has also said it's ethical. ABA opinions are advisory, but they set the tone. So what all of the opinions indicate is that as long as lawyers use reasonable care in using cloud computing and ensure that they protect confidential client data, that it's ethical to use the cloud. They go about what does reasonable care mean? They approach it in different ways. The opinions that have withstood the test of time have approached it from a very broad framework rather than requiring step-by-step questions that need to be asked, because the ones that provide a broad framework understand that technology changes with the times, and that by providing a to-do list based in whatever year that they are writing the opinion, the to-do list is going to become outdated pretty quickly. But what they all tend to emphasize is similar concepts. So all of them say you have a duty to exercise reasonable care when you put information in the cloud that's confidential. And they talk about you have to understand who's going to be handling your data and how and who they allow to have access to it. So you want to make sure that you understand who's going to have access to your data on the vendor side, and under what circumstances they will access the data. Oftentimes it's going to be at your request because you're having an issue and you need it solved. You need to understand how you can get your data out of that system and in what format. Should you choose to have on-site backups, or if you decide to move to a different provider, you need to understand how you're going to get your data out of the system and in what format. Or if the provider goes out of business, which is a lot less likely these days. There have actually been significant investments in legal tech, in particular cloud computing companies, in the last few months. It's been a very hot sector. So there's most of the companies have been around since 2008, 2010, give or take, and are very stable at this point. You want to see if they are backed, if they're funded, if they've been acquired, and by whom have they been acquired. You want to understand their financial stability when you choose the vendor, but also understand how you can get your data out of there if you choose to leave the vendor, or if something happens to the vendor that makes you want to get your money out of your data out of the vendor. Another thing you want to do is make sure you understand the service agreement. You want to review the service agreement and make sure that you understand it. And I always like to tell a story about one of my kids when it comes to this, just sort of to hammer this home. When my older daughter, who just went to college, it was much younger and was playing soccer one time. And I use the term playing loosely because she really just kind of ran around on the field. And she was supposed to be goalie at the time. And she was just standing around the goal posts. And a little while later, she ran up to me and she said, "Mom, I just saw something that's so funny. There's a sticker on the goal post. And it says something that doesn't make any sense. It says, use properly or serious death or injury can occur." And she laughed and she said, "That doesn't make any sense, Mom. Serious death? That's silly." And then she ran away. And I thought she'd read it wrong, but I walked over there and sure enough, someone hadn't edited, the copy editor hadn't done a very good job, and that's what it actually said. And I was impressed that, she took the time to read that legal disclaimer and actually processed it, which is not something most of us do on a day-to-day basis. But it was an indication to me that she probably wasn't gonna be playing soccer much longer, which is what happens, but that, you need to pay attention. You need to read these disclaimers. You need to read the service agreement so that you understand what it says, you understand the responsibilities that the provider is taking, and to understand your responsibilities under the agreement. So it's really important to understand the contract you have with the vendor and what protections are built in. Another thing is that you need to understand the integrations that come into the product. You need to understand how they're handled. You need to understand who's responsible if those integrations break. You want to make sure they're not going to point their fingers at each other. You want to understand how the security is vetted in terms of how the integration feeds into the product. And then you have to vet both providers because your data is in the cloud with both providers. And you have to reevaluate on a regular basis. The vast majority of opinions indicate that on a regular basis, you need to revisit about annually and check and make sure nothing's changed since the last time you vetted them and understood how they handle your information. And finally, you need to understand where the data is going to be located. Is there geo-redundant backup, meaning do the two servers talk to each other? Are they located in two different places? And if one of them is injured, damaged, or in an earthquake, for example, that the other one has updated, on the East Coast, has updated copies of your law firm's data. So you haven't lost access to your firm's data. And you want to understand if it's encrypted at rest and in transit, which is ideally what you'd like, and what the encryption levels are. So those are just some things you need to think about when you choose a cloud computing vendor. And it's important to just make sure that you realize that all of these tools that are used in the cloud are housed in the cloud, and you need to vet those vendors and make sure you understand how they use your information, protect it, and access it. And this is for a full list of questions that you need to ask the provider. You can go to that link on the bottom left-hand side, and it will provide you with a full list of questions that were from my cloud computing book that I've updated over the years. And I've covered a lot of these. You need to understand how it's encrypted, geo-redundancy I just talked about, data backups, how often is your data backed up, how can you extract your data, make sure that it stays in the United States if you're practicing law in the US. Just make sure that they don't ever push it off to servers located somewhere else, because then it will trigger the laws of those other countries, and you don't want to do that. And financial security, I also talked about that. I do want to highlight, before I dive into the tools, Pennsylvania Bar, they issued Formal Opinion 2020-300 in April, in direct response to COVID. And what they talked about were, they said remote working, all the ethical issues you need to think about with remote working. So it's a really good summary of those ethical issues as they relate to remote working. And they also include some COVID-related information like video conferencing and the safety precautions and things you need to have in place with video conferencing in terms of preserving confidential client data, and some of the steps that you should take to ensure that your video conferencing is more secure, along with a good rundown of all of these different concepts, including secure communication, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And I'll dive into that a bit more so at that point. So now, without further ado, now that I've gotten some of the drier stuff out of the way, let's dive into some of the tech tools. And I'm going to start with billing. And by billing, I'm talking about the process from time tracking, when you're logging your billable hours, all the way through payments, the payment process. And now that we're working remotely, getting paid has been one of the top pain points for law firms with remote work, because it's harder to, if they don't have systems in place to help them get paid in a contactless fashion, then it can be problematic for them. So what that means is that you need to have tools in place from start to finish that can allow you to remotely bill and remotely collect money from your clients. So that starts with, and I'm going to go through these time tracking tools in a few minutes. Time tracking, which is how you log your billable hours. And from there, once your billable hours are logged, whether it's on your iPhone, which often was more useful pre-COVID when people actually went to court or were working offsite, to tracking time on your computer and just ensuring that as you do the work is being tracked. And then once the time's tracked, that it's automatically input into an invoice. So when you pull up an invoice for clients, you'll have all the time entries logged into the invoice, which you can then review and edit. And then you can have the invoice created. So you can create a digital invoice, and then with a click of a button, send it to your client, so your client receives an email or a text, or however it is you like to send your client the bill and whatever the capability the software has built into it. Your client typically will receive an email with a payment link inside of that email. So in order to pay your bill, all they have to do is click on that link. It takes them to the payment processing system, enter their credit card or debit card information, click send, and your firm automatically gets paid. So not only does it remove this face-to-face contact or require people to be in an office to print out the bill and then put a stamp on it, send it out in the mail, wait for your client to get it a week later, review it, decide that they're going to pay by check, write a check, send the check to eventually, and then you have to wait for the check to clear. It gets rid of all those steps, saves administrative time, and it saves money because you're not paying for stamps, and your client can pay it quickly and easily, and it's automatically transferred to your firm. So that's why having a billing process in place that is online and streamlined can make all the difference, especially during COVID and in terms of getting paid during COVID. So in terms of time tracking, invoicing, and payment processing, what I have up here are time tracking tools to start with. So there are legal apps that are web-based, that are standalone, or they integrate with law practice management systems. Time 59, Bill for Time, and law practice management apps. Bill 50 Time has recently started to add, they were acquired by a company, and they've recently started to add more practice management features into their software as well. They used to just be for billing. But Time 59, Bill for Time, or law practice management apps will allow you to track time either on your computer or on your smartphone. It's really useful on your smartphone if you go to court, which I know you guys don't do as often as other attorneys, or if you're working off-site but the court example is a good way to explain how it works. You appear on one case, you answer an email for another case when you're in the hallway, then you run into opposing counsel, have a conversation with them about a third case. You can go, before you leave the building, enter your billable time for each of those cases, so that when you've left the building, it's entered into the billing system and already associated with the relevant invoices for each of those clients. So you haven't lost track of that time at the end of the day. I remember as an associate staring at a blank billing sheet at the end of the day some days, and I will have billed 2 hours, but I knew that I literally worked nonstop the entire day. So it's a good way to prevent that from happening. Also, some of them actually have, these are the more advanced systems, passive time tracking built in. What that means is that as you're working in the software, if you forget to enter reading an email, for example, or a phone conversation, it will, typically it's the stuff that occurs while you're in the system though. That being reading an email or responding to a client's message within the system. It will, at the end of the day, say, you go to a page and you'll see, it looks like you did this work, but you didn't ever enter it. Would you like to track that time and bill it? And so you click yes, and it will automatically capture that time for you. So passive time tracking, if you will. So there are also legal apps that are specifically designed, and a lot of larger firms use this, and you may use this, iTimekeep, which was also recently acquired. There are a lot of legal acquisitions happening recently and funding. But iTimekeep, a lot of larger firms use this. They have server-based billing, and they want to be able to enter billable time on their smartphones or mobile devices. What iTimekeep does is it provides an interface with the server-based billing systems so that attorneys can enter that time, track it, and then it interfaces with the billing system and then associates that track time with the appropriate client. And there are also non-legal apps that are just standalone apps. These aren't quite as useful, because when you track time, they simply provide you with a list, which you then have to somehow enter or associate with your cases rather than automatically happening. But for some firms, they're nevertheless a good in-between step. So there are also non-legal apps. TimeWorks Pro is one example. And then when it comes to invoicing and payment processing, there are standalone apps, and there are also app tools like these, like payment processing. It's built right into law practice management or billing systems. For a full list of these, I provided a lot of articles with my written materials, but sometimes it's difficult to get permission to reprint. So my ABA journal articles are not included in there, but they're available online. My ABA column that I write every month is written based upon one type of software each month. And when COVID came out, I specifically focused on software that would be relevant to lawyers trying to work remotely during COVID. So one of my ABA journal articles is on payment processing. One of them is on invoicing, the actual billing and creating invoices, and another is on time tracking. So if you just Google my name and then ABA journal and then whatever topic I just mentioned, you can pull up an article that lists all of your different options. It explains that specific function and then lists a bunch of the ways that you can use that function, whether it's standalone apps or tools or billing or law practice management systems. And then I also highlight some of the companies that may have standout features. I work for MyCase, like I mentioned at the beginning, but in those articles, I'll sometimes highlight our competitors that have standout features depending on the topic that I'm talking about. So if you want specific options available for you for invoicing and payment processing, you can look those articles up and it'll give you a very detailed analysis of those issues. So let's move on to collaboration tools. This has become obviously particularly important during COVID, and collaboration tools allow you to collaborate on documents in particular with your clients and other attorneys in your office. So there are a bunch of different types of collaboration tools. Some of them are intended primarily for communicating, and others are actually collaborating on documents and collaborating within the documents. And there's a wide range of tools out there. I've just gone over some of the more obvious ones here that help you with these different things. So because of COVID and because everyone's working remotely, one thing that happens is you can't just stick your head in someone's office to ask a question. You need to have some way to have those short conversations. And it's also a lot more difficult to work remotely if your word processing isn't in the cloud. So some of these tools enable that so that you can work at a document with someone else, have comments, have highlight it, mark it up. And so that's where a lot of these tools come into. And there's free tools, and there's paid tools, and there's legal, and there's non-legal. I typically recommend that as attorneys, you're better off using a paid version of any of these tools, and preferably a version created for lawyers, with lawyers in mind, because those companies get lawyers. They understand your confidential, the confidentiality that you have to maintain, and they understand your needs specifically. And I would just note, I knew this was going to happen. I don't think you can hear my dogs very much, but their arch nemesis, the mailman, shows up right about the middle of this. So I'll just, they're going to be barking momentarily, but I put them in the basement, so hopefully it's not interfering too much. So let me just dive into some of the collaboration tools. So first, for free, Google Docs, Trello, and Slack, they all offer free options. Google Docs is word processing in the cloud that allows you to collaborate, add comments, collaborate in real time and make changes in real time. Slack is a lot like, I mean, most people are familiar with Slack at this point, but it allows you to have instant messaging with other people in your organization. You can create channels, reminders. They've added a lot of new features. You can even do video conferencing, video calls through it. Trello is more of like a to-do list, but it is another way. But it does have collaboration features built in. All of those are non-legal. There are paid versions of more sophisticated tools. There's law practice management systems in the cloud. Those are designed specifically for lawyers. They will have collaboration and messaging features built in. Some have chat built in so that you can easily chat with other members of your organization. They have messaging with your clients. Your clients can send you confidential, secure messages. I'm going to talk about the importance of that in a moment. And then others allow you to have store documents in the cloud and collaborate on those documents. Dropbox and Box.net are two examples, and they've both recently built in encryption tools that are more useful for lawyers in terms of deciding whether you want to hold the encryption key or whether you want the company to hold the encryption key. Typically, the lawyers that have those issues are lawyers that represent, it's the FISA warrants in particular. So if you think that for some reason a FISA warrant might be served for your information, your confidential client data, what happens is the company has no option but to provide that information to the government, and they cannot tell you that they did that by operation of law, and they would be committing treason if they did so. So if for some reason you think you might be, your client's data might be subject to a FISA warrant, that would matter to you, but typically most lawyers and law firms do not need to hold the encryption code, and it's sufficient for the company to do so. But Box.net and Dropbox have started to roll out options where you can ensure that you hold the code. And so they have started to meet some of the needs of lawyers a little more specifically. And Glass Cubes I always mention because I use that to collaborate with my co-author Carolyn Elephant on our Social Media for Lawyers book. And it's still around. That book was published in 2010, but it was a really useful way to collaborate on a complex concept like that with someone else. So let's move on to secure communication. And this is really important in the time of COVID. So I'm going to talk about the ethics a teeny bit more. But first, let me explain the concept of secure communication. So email, which was given the green light by the ethics, the Bar Association's ethics committees in the mid-90s, is inherently unsecure. Traditional email is unencrypted, and it's like sending a postcard written in pencil through the post office. But in the mid-1990s, businesses were all using it. It was like a tidal wave, and the bar associations gave email the green light. But the opinion said, should the technology change, we may revisit this. So I'm going to talk about that momentarily because they have very recently begun to revisit that concept. The next step is encrypted email. So you can encrypt your emails individually. Sometimes, so Google, Gmail, and Outlook Mail have tools built in that allow you to encrypt each email individually. And there are also encrypted email software tools that you can use with your clients. The clients have to create accounts and use them in order for it to be encrypted while being transmitted. And oftentimes it's not, it's sort of complex to set those systems up. You usually need IT help. They're not particularly easy to set up on your own. You can also encrypt documents. So Microsoft Word, for example, will allow you to encrypt a single document. So you can encrypt a single email, encrypt a single attachment, and send that to your client on a case-by-case basis. And the reason I'm talking about case-by-case basis is because that will come up momentarily too when I talk about the ethics. Then finally, there's encrypted, protected communications that are confined to a specific platform, client portals, if you will. So you use these with your doctors, you use them with banks and with your financial managers possibly. And that's where you log in to get messages and exchange information with a professional that you work with, where the information has to be protected. These secure online portals are available in law practice management software. And they allow your clients to send you messages in one location. You can respond to those messages. You can also communicate with other people that you've invited to the case, so co-counsel, experts, other lawyers internally at your firm, and all those conversations and communications occur encrypted inside the platform and are associated with whatever case they're connected with. So the reason I mention the client portals is A, they're very secure, but they are also a really easy way to encrypt all of your communications. Why does this matter? Because in 2017, the ABA issued opinion 477 that said that for particularly sensitive matters, lawyers need to use encrypted communication. And in that opinion, they said that on a case-by-case basis, you need to assess the communication itself and also what you're going to be talking about in any specific case, and decide how you're going to communicate with your clients. And if necessary, if it's particularly sensitive information, you need to Ensure that it's discussed via an encrypted channel rather than unencrypted email. When that opinion came out, whenever I write about this, I advise people to avoid this case-by-case song and dance analysis and simply just come out with, choose an encrypted communication method, because that's the wave of the future. And once the ABA issued that advisory opinion, I fully expected that other ethics committees would start to do so. And that's what happened this year. Early in February, right before COVID really hit, I think it was Michigan, and now I'm having a little bit of a mind blank. I'm pretty sure it was Michigan. I just wrote about this, issued an opinion on technology competence for lawyers. And they included in that, they adopted the 477 analysis from ABA's opinion 477 regarding secure communication, and said that you need to assess the sensitivity of the information on a case-by-case basis and ensure that you use secure channels of communication for particularly sensitive information. And in the Pennsylvania opinion I cited earlier, in April, the Pennsylvania Ethics Committee did the same thing and adopted the rationale of ABA 477. So I would suggest that it's just a matter of time, and that COVID, again, has accelerated this need for secure communication. So I would strongly suggest that when it comes to secure communication, you think about the options that I just outlined, and ensure that one way or another you have a process in place, depending on how you choose to use it, whether it's case by case or just for all communications, in place for those particularly sensitive conversations, especially now that we're all working remotely and those are occurring by electronic communication more often now than ever before. Next, there is document storage, and I touched upon some of these tools earlier in the collaboration section. So document storage just means that you're simply storing your data online. It's not software as a service, at least it didn't used to be. It's just storing your data there. But a lot of the providers like Dropbox and Box that allow you to store your data there have started to build in collaboration features. And once you have software that allows you to do things to your documents, then that becomes software as a service, and it's more than just document storage in the cloud. But even so, the concepts are still the same. But so with document storage, you have a number of different options, and those are both legal specific and then not legal specific. So for legal specific, there's law practice management platforms. There's also document management platforms. I've written an article on document management for the ABA Journal that I wrote since COVID hit in May. So if I go into all the specific options that you have available when it comes to document storage from the document management companies like NetDocuments, and I manage, for example, to the law practice management software companies and the tools that they have available, and your options when it comes to online document storage in the legal specific software space. Then there's the non-legal specific software space, Dropbox and Box. Those are, and in the legal practice management space, it's encrypted by the company, although NetDocuments, for example, has actually started to roll out features that allow you to hold the encryption key. That's a fairly new feature that they told me about. I believe it was Legal Week earlier this year, before, when I could still go to conferences. So some law practice management document storage programs will actually allow you to hold the encryption key in terms of that whole FISA issue I mentioned earlier. Dropbox and Box are non-legal document management storage companies that have often met legal needs, and some of them now, Box and I think Dropbox also, will allow you to hold the encryption key. I think it's on a case-by-case basis, but they have that available. It may just be an overall feature. You'll have to find out from them. And then there are ways to, Spider Oak is one company that, document management company, not specific to legal, that hangs a tad on that encryption issue, allowing you to hold the encryption key. Boxcryptor is a tool that you can put on top of Dropbox that allows you to hold the encryption key. It's an integration with Dropbox, if you will. So, there is a question about whether most applications for registration constitute particularly sensitive communications. That's something you need to ascertain as to whether it's particularly sensitive. They're very vague in those opinions as to what that means, because it varies on a practice by practice basis. And I would suggest that maybe with patent, and big disclaimer, I know nothing. I've never practiced patent law, so I'm not going to purport to understand the intricacies of what you do on a regular basis as patent attorneys. But my inclination would be to suggest that some patents are probably more likely to be of interest to outside bad actors than others. So I think that might be the guiding principle when it comes to patent and particularly sensitive communications. How likely is it that, even if it's not a FISA warrant, that someone's going to want to hack in and get that information? So, but a general concept we always use in this, talking about the cloud in general and storing data in it, is Coca-Cola would never want to store its formula in the cloud because it's so integral to their business. And if it's ever disclosed, it could have a huge impact on their business and their bottom line. So in that particular situation, you probably want to store it in a safe where multiple people have to enter information, or the biometrics of multiple people to open that safe to get that information. So other examples that I tend to use are if you're a criminal defense attorney and you're representing someone charged with terrorism or a Chinese dissident. In those situations, there is a chance that a government somewhere might be interested in that case and might try to hack into the data to see if they can get information about it. Or if you're representing a matrimonial lawyer representing a famous person in a divorce versus just an average person who's not particularly well known, you may want to protect that information further for the famous person, because there are people that can make a lot of money off of that information in the gossip, online gossip rags, if you will. And so with patents, how likely is it that somebody else might want to get access to that information that you're working with? So I think that would be sort of the guiding principle with patents and the type of information that you tend to handle. Another tech tip that's great for during the pandemic and all remote work is scanning tools. So with scanning tools, you have a range of products available, from iOS apps that are good for a couple pages at a time to scanning hardware. And this has been a pain point for law firms during COVID, because the person or people that were in the offices that were designated to handle scanning had access to scanners right at their desks. Or else they had access to huge copier size scanners where they would scan data in that way. And once everyone was removed from their offices, scanning became a pain point, and they had to figure out ways to allow this scanning to occur at different locations at these people's homes, since they couldn't come into the office. And I would suggest that with all of these tools, in terms of future facing, the next 6 months are going to be highly unpredictable, maybe even the next 9 months. And there may be a back and forth from in-office to being back out of the office again. So most law firms, in terms of disaster planning and business continuity planning and resiliency, just general business resiliency in general, should have processes in place to allow them to efficiently work and be able to shift quickly to remote working. And scanning tools are one of the important pieces. Another is VoIP, and I should be discussing that. I plan to discuss that later. So and VoIP is voice over internet protocol phone systems. So with scanning tools, you can have individual apps that just cost a few dollars. In some cases, they're free, depending on the particular app. And they allow you to scan, take pictures with your phone of a document, and then it's converted into a PDF that often can be OCR scanned, so that the software can read it and pull words out of it and search for terms. So these are great because you can scan documents from anywhere, as long as you got your phone with you and a data connection. So but it's sort of cumbersome to scan with your phone on a page-by-page basis. If the document's more than 20 pages, it's going to be super inconvenient, but they're great tools to have in a pinch. And then there are the desktop scanners. Those are probably the best option in the pandemic for both lawyers and the administrative personnel that are responsible for scanning. The Fujitsu ScanSnap has been the scanner of choice for solo and small firm lawyers, and I would suggest that in the pandemic with people working from home, it's an affordable, very powerful option for scanning tools. And I included, there is an article, a blog post, I believe, in the materials that talks about some scanning tools and the different options available. But the Fujitsu Scan Step really is the best option. But there are others, Neat Scanner, Epson Perfection, Kodak ScanMade, and they update the capabilities every year, but they're just different, fairly affordable options that are great for desktop scanning. And they're also very powerful tools. So PDF annotation, this is great because you can use your iPad is what it tends to work best on, but you can also do it on your computer to take a PDF of a document and edit it, add comments. You can add voice comments, so telling someone to send a letter, like enclose the final document and send this letter, telling your admin assistant, for example. You can highlight, annotate, add written comments, add typed comments. It provides all sorts of capabilities when you're working with a PDF document. They're particularly helpful if you are commuting. Granted, I think a lot of people are no longer commuting the way they used to. But when things get back to normal, they're great for doing work on the subway, on a commuter train, because you can be working while you're actually commuting. So in the future, when we're all back to normal, whenever that may be, they can be particularly useful for lawyers that are doing that. But there are iOS apps. Some PDF Expert is the one that I like. Others that are very popular with lawyers include Goodreader, iAnnotate, and Readdle Docs. Those are all iOS apps for your smartphone or your iPad, but the iPad works better for documents in terms of viewing them and working with them, in my opinion. The iPhone screens are just too small. There's web-based software, so this means you can use it on your computer or any other device. Typically, it's going to work better on the computer, and the information stored online, and it can be accessed by anyone. You can share it, and they can also access it once you've added your comments. PDF Escape and PDF Online Reader are some examples, and then there's desktop software, which you actually download to your server or your hard drive. Adobe Acrobat, I think we're all familiar with that. That's also in the cloud, but it's a slightly different product. Foxit and Ocular, those are other options for the PDF viewing and annotation. Legal research, I'm just going to go into really quickly because there's so many different interesting options now, and legal research isn't just static legal research. But that there are free options that are available that a lot of people don't think about or aren't aware of. Google Scholar is great. Google Scholar is free through Google, and it provides you with access to all the cases, and it even has some decent tools built in that resemble shepherdizing. The FastCase app is great, especially in a pinch in court, which is more useful for litigators, but it's this idea of if opposing counsel cites a case and you're not familiar with it and you're in court, you can just pull it up for free on the FastCase app. You can't store your searches, last time I looked, but it's nice to have that available in a pinch. Then you can have free legal research tools through your bar association that you belong to and their partnerships, CaseMaker, FastCase, Versus Law, those are often ones that are available. For a price, even if your bar doesn't have a membership, but you want to have a lower cost research option, there's CaseMaker, FastCase, and Versus Law, which you can access for much more reasonable prices than Westlaw and Lexis will provide you. And which leads us to Westlaw and Lexis. They've been around forever. We've all used them. We learned about them in law school, and they're the most expensive, and the plans vary, but some of the things that they're doing, and FastCase is doing this too. I just wrote about some of these tools, which is further beyond legal research, and it's more litigation analytics. But they allow you, I'll finish this thought and then I'll let you read the code. They allow you to track dockets and also get analytics on different parties to any particular case that you're working on. And I'm going to talk about those at the very tail end of this when I get to the advanced AI types of tools that are available, and I just do a very quick rundown of that. I think we're going to read the...
Yep. For those who are here for CLE, just note down this code. It's P like Peter, the number 7, H like Harry, N like Nikki, and A like amazing. And I'll give it back to you. Thanks, everyone. That's P7HNA. Thanks so much.
Okay, so let me move on to video conferencing. This I added because of COVID. With video conferencing, you have a bunch of different options. I wrote an ABA journal article on video conferencing right when COVID hit. For non-legal, for free, there's Google Meet and Zoom. But once there are fees with Zoom once you start to use certain features. And Zoom has like a 40-minute cap still, I believe. But you have those options for video conferencing, and Google Meet has really expanded the features because of COVID. And if you have a Gmail address or your law firm uses Gmail, it's now built in and available there, along with all those added features that they're including. For non-legal tools that are available that are not free, there's WebEx, GoToMeeting, Skype, Signal, and WhatsApp are other options. Those are some of those are iOS apps and are typically used on mobile, and others are available on the computer. The reason that everybody's always talking about Zoom is that Zoom is the most user-friendly, in my opinion, and that's why most people tend to default to Zoom. There's now also Microsoft Teams. They also built that in because of COVID and have built up on it and rolled it out more extensively as a result of COVID. Legaler is a legal specific option, and last I knew, they had rolled out, I think it was 6 months free for lawyers during COVID. And it's legal specific. That's sort of their sales marketing pitch, if you will, that it's specifically designed with the needs of lawyers in need. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that whatever conference platform you're using, that you're aware of the security issues. And in the Pennsylvania opinion I cited previously, they talk about the ways to address some of those. At the beginning of the pandemic, there were lots of Zoom bombing where strangers would bomb the meetings and oftentimes share child porn on the screens, which was problematic. There are a lot of features built in by default now on Zoom and other platforms to prevent that, whether it's password protected meetings, allowing waiting rooms, so you only allow people in that actually are part of the meeting. So there are other types of tools built into tools that prevent people from sharing their screens, tools that prevent people, other ways of preventing them from co-opting the meeting that you're holding. So, but there's a lot of different considerations. Like I said, that Pennsylvania opinion really provides a good rundown of the issues to think of and the security tips to look for when you're choosing a video conferencing platform. I also added VoIP and digital fax just to go over quickly. I wrote ABA journal articles on both of these as well since the pandemic started. VoIP is voice over internet protocol for the phone. It means you're using the phone over the internet. When the pandemic hit, one of the biggest problems for firms large and small was their landline phone systems. Finding a way to have those phone calls, the phones manned, and then the calls and messages shared. VoIP makes it so that you just have to have a computer connection, an internet connection, so that you can have somebody who is the receptionist who handles all the calls and then can even just transfer them to people's phones individually through the voice over internet protocol system. So I would suggest for most law firms, you need to have a VoIP system in place as the pandemic goes on, because you need to be prepared to have everyone offsite and have your firm still run and take those calls as they come in and distribute them to your team. And then digital fax, some courts and some lawyers still use and prefer fax for certain types of communications. eFax has been around since the early 2000s, but a lot of people haven't used electronic faxes. eFax was the first one to roll out, but there are plenty of other options available, which I talk about in my article. And it just makes it so that you can send these digital faxes. That being said, they're typically received via email, and that email issue gets triggered, meaning how confidential are the communications? Landlines are much more secure than eFax. So you need to start to think about those communication security issues when you're using digital fax machines as well. And then I just wanted to talk about emerging technology. And then I'll have hit about my hour, and they had set aside about 10 minutes for questions. I know I've gone over I'm right at the limit where this was supposed to have ended. It started a little late, but I needed to get an hour in for purposes of your CLE credits, and then we can take whatever questions there are. But I also understand if there aren't a ton, because you guys probably want to get to lunch. So let me just touch upon the very tail end of this and just talk about a few emerging technology issues. Smartwatches and artificial intelligence, aka robot lawyers. I just like to mention smartwatches briefly because if you don't have one yet, it's a fantastic way to get the notifications you absolutely need, no matter where you are, particularly when you're in meetings or in court, or so that you get the must-have information, but filter out all the rest. And that's particularly useful for women attorneys because male attorneys have their phones with large pockets. For some reason, we don't get pockets as women. So it's hard to have your phone in a pocket that's near your body. Men will often put them in the pocket to their suit, jacket or blazer, and they can feel the vibrations that let them know if there's a message coming through. Women have their phones typically in their purses or in their briefcases because it's oftentimes rude to leave it out on the desk when you're in the middle of a meeting. So they'll miss important information, whether it's from their administrative assistant, and the same goes for men. You know, you may have your administrative assistant or an associate trying to call you about something, or your spouse or daycare even. And in those situations, or the court, and that's the information you want to get, even if you are in a meeting. And what's so nice about the watches is you can get that information surreptitiously, unobtrusively, without interfering with a meeting. And it's a great way to mute out everything that's unnecessary, but get the super important information. It's also great when you're traveling and you're trying to navigate, so you don't look like a newbie in a strange city because your watch will be telling you where to walk and how to go. Lots of other great tools. In all the health tools, no reason to go into those here, but I highly recommend it. And then just AI. I wrote my ABA Journal article last month about contract analytics, and I wrote the one this month, which should be released in a day or two, about legal litigation analytics. But oftentimes those tools are useful for patent lawyers too, because it helps you understand the parties, and that you can get a lot of information, docket information, that's useful for patent attorneys. So typically there's all different, and it's also really useful in legal research. So there's really three categories where those are the three categories you're seeing really useful AI tools being rolled out. And essentially all that they're doing is taking huge amounts of data. That's why the largest companies like Lexis and Westlaw and Bloomberg are often coming out with these tools, because they have access to huge data sets. And it's, with programming, it's garbage in, garbage out. You're only going to get good actionable results if the data that they're pulling information from is good data. So that's why you're often seeing the largest companies come out with the best of this. But what it does is it takes huge data sets, whether it's PACER information, whether it's PACER information combined with news stories, whether it's all the legal research and all the cases, and depending on what you're trying to get, it provides you with actionable results. Also contracts. So if you're trying to do an NDA, it will take the NDA that just came in that your client needs reviewed, compared to hundreds of thousands of others, and let you know about the outliers immediately within seconds. So those are a number of different ways that you're finding emerging technology and artificial intelligence in particular to be appearing in the legal technology space. So with that being said, I just want to leave you with, I always encourage lawyers to be curious about technology. I'm a huge Trekkie, and this is a quote kind of turned on its head from Garrick, who's a bad actor. He's a Cardassian, he's not a great guy, but the truth is usually just an excuse for lack of imagination. And I would suggest that when it comes to lawyers and technology competence, if you can imagine it, and if you can open your mind and think about the ways tech can help you, you're going to realize it's worth adopting and using technology. And hopefully some of the tools I discussed will be a particular use to at least a few of them to all of you. And I hope that you learned something, and I really appreciate your listening today. Thank you so much. And if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer them.
All right. Well, I want to give people a little bit of time to ask some questions. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat. No matter which platform you are in, our team will get the questions over here to Niki to be able to answer them. Niki, that was great. Oh, here we go. They're coming in.
With the signature services, they all have different features, and I can't really necessarily recommend one in particular. I know that HelloSign and DocuSign are both universally popular with lawyers. I see in the legal technology forums that lawyers use them across the board. Another option I would suggest is lots of law practice management software now has it built in. So if your company does use that, don't overlook the built-in tools that may be available, because that actually streamlines the whole document production process if it's built right in or integrates into your law practice management software or document management software that your company's using. But HelloSign and DocuSign tend to be the two most popular ones with lawyers. But every law firm and every lawyer has different needs, and it is really a case-by-case analysis that you'll need to walk through when choosing which one's best for you and your needs.
And Nikki, I know one question everyone always has is, any tips you might have on the best way to make sure you're integrating and actually using this technology once you, kind of make that purchase and get that, subscription in place. Do you have any tips for kind of that next step to making sure it doesn't just sit there?
Well, I mean, the one thing is, especially with a secure communication, to ensure that your clients know, oftentimes in the um, retainer agreement, that this is how we're going to be communicating about the case. The reason that we're doing it this way, the reason you have to create a login and use this software is because it's to protect the confidential client information. This is how we do it, and this is how we're going to do it. And when you set those expectations up front, they're often more amenable to doing it. And sometimes whoever your provider is may have some videos or other types of educational information that your clients can look at to get a sense of how it's going to work, or tips on how to implement that with your client. So that's one way. And in terms of getting it into your firm, there's a host of different methodologies that, it depends on whether you're trying to transition all your firm's data into the software, all of it, or just the open cases, or do you want to just start with the new cases? And how much time and energy do you want to have spent on your side of things, working with the provider to get the data into your system, and how important is it that it's actually all in the system? And how time consuming is it going to be for people, your employees, to work with a provider? And what's the cost benefit analysis of that time expenditure?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. All right. Any other questions, guys? Throw them in the chat. But Niki should be around. Request a meeting with her. Find some time to connect during the conference, before, after, etc. But Niki, thank you again. That was really wonderful and really educational. I love learning about tech tools, particularly for practicing law. This was extremely helpful to get your opinions. Everyone else, up next, we have sessions at 1 p.m. Eastern, building a subscription practice, and when it isn't what it is, maintaining a brand distinctiveness and avoiding genericide. Go to the schedule page to choose which session to attend and join. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much.